Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome back to the Word Magic Podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Adair-Benning, New York Times bestselling ghostwriter and word fiend. And today I have somebody super special with me, the lovely and wonderful Jennifer Goulden. Jennifer is my favorite editor to send people to, although not my favorite when she's editing my own stuff, but we'll talk about that too. So today we're going to talk all about what an editor wishes you actually understood. Jen, do you want to do a little intro of yourself?
Sure. Thank you for that wonderful intro. You're also my favorite ghostwriter and copy magic queen. I'm an editor first and foremost. I work with authors to help them get their stories out of, off the page and get it polished, get it, just ready for public consumption, and work with them on that process so that they can put it out and just be sure that it's the best professional, best version of their story that it can be. So, as far as editing is concerned, that includes lots of different things, which we'll get into. But I want you to edit that because I have so many ums.
We're
Can
not
you
going to
edit
edit
my
it.
edit? I'm an
No, we're not.
editor.
I'm not editing the editor. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk today about like four different components of how to actually like what an editor really wants you to know. And Jen being an editor, she's used to like me editing or like editing to make it perfect. And I'm not going to allow that today. This is about writer. It's like the first draft, Jen. We're going with the first draft. The
It's the
worst draft,
bait and
you're going to
switch.
love it.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
not a
All
bait
right.
and switch. It's good because this is where like honestly, and you and I both know this, sometimes this is where like the juicy bits come out because we get something that we're like, oh, that's good. So first of all, I think that there's a misnomer in the industry about what editors actually do. I think that there's a lot of clients who just are like, I wrote a book, I need an editor, but they have no idea what you do and they don't understand that there's multiple types of editors. So let's talk about like the different types of editors that exist. What does that look like?
Right. Well, probably the biggest, I guess, confusion is that people will say, I need an editor, and what they think they're saying is that they need a proofreader. So that they think that an editor will just go through and kind of correct the spelling and the grammar. But that's actually often a different person. Sometimes it's the editor who will do that after they've done multiple editing sweeps. But editing is more about the content itself. So you can have different kind of editors, copy and line, which will just go through one line at a time and make sure each line, each sentence makes sense in the scheme of things. Or you'll have a developmental or substantive editor, depending who you're talking to, and they will go through that copy and line. You'll see markup everywhere, but also they'll be like, hey, you haven't introduced this topic yet, or did you know that you already mentioned that, or did you realize that you're doing this but missing that? That's a substantive editor, and it's really what I mostly do,
Mhm.
because I find every story needs it. Even after you've written your story and then rewritten it and then rewritten it, oftentimes you just need another set of eyes to go, you know what? You can't step out of the box and see this, so let me do it. And then we get back on track.
100 million%. And as a writer and a long-term writer, I have learned to love and loathe my editors because they are really the people that take my work and give it, that beautiful process of kind of cleaning it up and tightening it up. And we get so stuck in as a ghostwriter, I get so stuck into the writing. I can't remember sometimes whether I introduced a topic or whether I did a thing. So it's nice to get a fresh pair of eyes to come in and view it and look it over. So even as a ghostwriter, even though I work in book coaching and I do book development, my clients always end up on Jen or another editor's desk to find out, to like really polish the work that we've done together and make sure that it's perfect and ready for print. So thank you for that. Um, most of the
My
time, I thank
pleasure.
you for that. When I see the red notes, not always, but most of the time,
I
I thank you for
know,
that.
I
In
know.
the long run, I thank you for that. So there, I think there's a couple different levels. There's like the before, during, and the after of the manuscript and things that you wish that people knew, right? So I think like before you somebody ever sends their manuscript to an editor, what do you wish that they knew?
Well, I wish they knew that maybe when I say kind of a first polished draft manuscript is something that I'd like to see, I guess my version of that is that you've written it, you've dumped all your ideas onto a page, then you've gone through and you've like given it order. There's an arc, there's sentence structure, there's basics, right? And that you've basically proofread it. So like if you send me something that is mostly just ideas on a page, which there's nothing wrong with that, that's a different process. That's, almost that's between ghostwriting and substantive editing.
Yeah.
So just having, when a manuscript comes to me, maybe just have had, a couple of read throughs, you've done some proofreading, you're pretty confident, maybe you showed it to a friend, you're not going to change your topic halfway through or anything like that. Like you're committed to this story.
Yeah. Death
Yeah.
sentence when they want to change halfway through.
Oh, I
I
know.
totally get that. I think, and you and I have talked about this too. It's also not being so rigid on your story that you're not willing to change something in the editing process. Because sometimes, when a great substantive editor like yourself gets to a project, you look at it, and even though, maybe it's gone through the hands of 3 or 4 other people, you might be like, you know what, we need more character development, or we need to flesh out this one story, or this actually needs a chapter added into it to like, make the tie through that much clearer. So I would say like being open to change before you ever submit your manuscript to an editor is essential, because they're going to change things. That is their job. Like, you are paying
And
somebody.
it's hard.
Yeah.
It's
It's hard.
hard, right? Because you're like, this is my story. I put everything into it. Here's my heart on my sleeve. Now tell me how many ways I'm wrong. And I take that seriously. Like I know and I talk to every author that way. Like I realize that you're invested. This is your
Yeah.
soul on paper in black and white. And I am careful
Yeah.
about that. But yeah, so there's going to be feedback. And if there's going to be
Totally.
feedback, just know that it's for the sake of the story. It's never personal. I do want them to know that this is just to give them the best possible voice that they could have it's not about what I want the story to say. It's about, okay, this is how they talk. This is how their experience is. This is what probably they would have said or could have said here. And that's the kind of feedback, right? So they may in the first couple of days go, oh my gosh, there's so many edits. I'm terrible. Imposter syndrome, blah, blah, blah. No. This is just part of the process. And
Yeah.
every single writer, like James Patterson, he owns half the library and the bookshelf space.
Sure.
He has editors. He has substantive editors. He's got ghostwriters. He's got co-writers,
Yeah, I mean, James Patterson has over 200 novels. You don't actually think he wrote them all himself, guys. Like,
I don't think
that's
so.
not
And
the
if
thing.
he did, well,
I
great,
mean, more power to
amazing.
him if he did. I'm like super impressed if he wrote every single one of them on his own. But in
Same.
truth, it takes an army, and that's what people often don't understand about book writing, is that there is an army of humans involved in getting your book to publish and prepped in the right way. Okay, so now we've taken our manuscript, we've self-edited it, we've like proofread it ourselves, we're open to changes, we bring our manuscript to that editor, and you know oftentimes this is when a ton during the editing process, that's when authors, I should say, typically get freaked out, right? Because they see a ton of red notes, they see lines and edits, they see proofreading and substantial editing, and all they're seeing is red, red, red. And that's when that imposter syndrome kind of creeps up, and we get a little bit of a chip on our shoulder sometimes. And
Yeah.
I work with my authors while they're working with you.
So you hear both sides. So we're like, Jen
Both
just did
sides.
this? Oh my gosh.
I get both sides of the coin, which is super fun. But it's really an important point to recognize that when a substantive editor, and this is like from a writer's perspective, they give you suggestions that are going to make your work better, and you as the author always have the right to say no. I'd
Yeah.
advise you to
100%.
say yes like 90% of the time. But if there's one specific thing or two specific things that are so integral to who you are as a writer that you have to have it, stand your ground. And I know you
Absolutely.
and I have had this discussion before. There was something recently that came back from you guys that you were editing that I was like, absolutely not. I'm not taking it out. It belongs in there. And I was hard nosed on it. You guys pushed it a little bit. I still was hard nosed on it. At the end of the day, my work, or in this case, my client's, project for my client, but we stuck on it and made the decision together that like, absolutely not, doesn't need to be changed. How often does that
Absolutely.
happen?
I mean, every book has a couple of those for
Totally.
sure. I mean, oftentimes what that means, like if I'm like, why is this here? Just take it out. What it usually means is I'm not getting like how core important that is to them
Oh,
as the storyteller or as the author. So basically, if we go to task over it, then I realize, okay, this is bigger than what I thought. And
yeah.
what ends up happening often is we will actually build it out so that we can support whatever it is that I was like, get rid of this, because I'm a
Yeah.
ruthless editor, right? Like if we don't need it, lose it. Um, that
Yeah.
just means that maybe it wasn't coming across strong enough so that the reader would even
Yeah.
understand how important this was.
Well, and
So,
even though I
and
won
fight
that
back.
particular argument,
Yeah.
I remember you guys both like you and Chris were editing it together, and you both were
Oh,
like,
I know what you're
"Oh,
talking about.
yeah, yeah, yeah."
Okay.
And you were both like, "Look, if you're gonna hold it, we might have to clarify something here." And also,
Hmm.
I've been wrong before, guys. I admit it. I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I've been wrong before.
Uh,
Like it's when I'm ghostwriting for a book, I'm writing exactly what the client is telling me. If the client messes up something they tell me, or they said something that they didn't mean, and I put it in the book, and Jen catches it, I think it's right because that's what the client told me,
because
right?
you've already had that conversation with the client going, are you
Correct.
sure?
And I thought, the client was just like adamant, like, no, it's right. And then we kept reading it, and Jen and Chris were like, it's not right. And I'm like, I don't know. They're telling me it's right. So I'm gonna have to hold on this and say, don't change it. And then eventually the client finally got around to it. And this is something to be said about responding to your editors on time.
Hmm.
um, the client finally got around to it and actually agreed with Chris and Jen. So I'm going to bat for the client, being like, nope, they said it, leave it alone, don't touch it. And ultimately, Jen and Chris were correct, but
Hmm.
the client didn't go into their book for a very long time. And
Yeah.
so there was a delay. So I would actually say during the editing process, one of the most important points, honestly, is keeping up with your editor, having
Yeah.
those
It really
conversations,
helps.
like being on top of going in and approving the edits and reviewing what they're saying and answering their questions. And if you're not doing that, don't get hung up on how long it's taking, because it's usually not their fault. It's usually yours as the writer.
Yeah. I mean, humans are such terrible, we're so bad at estimating time. It's like the number one thing. Oh, sure, I can do that in 3 days. Oh, I can do it in a week.
Oh yeah.
And then the more you get into it, I was talking with another author right before this. I asked her, I'm like, I'm okay, I'm doing this webinar. So what do you think that you've learned? And what she
Yeah.
said was that she's like, when you first look at the editing and the book writing and the ghost writing and whatever, all the timelines, you think, oh, that's a long time. And then we're almost at the end of her book, and she's
Yeah.
like, now I feel like I don't have enough time. So you look at it and you think there's not enough there, there's too long and whatever. And then when you get near the end, you're wishing for more, like just one more thing, just one more. What if I polish this? What if I rewrite that?
Like our
And then
client
it
that
ends
added
up,
like 3 chapters. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And then it
Yeah.
comes to, Crystal and I are like, okay, you have to stop rewriting your rewrites.
No
We
more.
have to just commit to what we've got on the page and let's launch this
Absolutely.
thing and, make a
Absolutely.
splash.
Absolutely. Now, in the post editing and those final steps, because, right, so we've gone from beginning, like you haven't submitted it yet, now you submitted it. You got to be flexible and adaptable. You've got to meet some deadlines. And you've got to have a bit of a backbone to stand on certain things that you want, but also be flexible enough to change
Yeah.
it when it needs to. Now we're in the post editing, the final steps, right? So this is when all the editing has been done on your end. It's now in the client hands. And like I would say, they need to make sure that they review everything super thoroughly. Like reread
Yeah.
it and reread it and reread it. Like how many times do you think a client should actually reread their book before it goes to print?
They should have a little space between their last rewrite and the final read through.
Mhm.
And what I suggest, if you really want to make sure that there's not errors, is to read it out loud to somebody, to yourself, whatever. Read from start to finish out loud. You'll catch so many like little things that
Yeah.
maybe would have flown past, even your editor or your proofreader or your Grammarly or whatever it is you're using,
Or your ghostwriter.
um,
Like
or your ghostwriter.
I write it and sometimes I forget about it. And then when I read it out loud, because I'm going backwards, my brain goes, oh, that didn't work. And I have to rewrite it. So
Yeah.
definitely. I'm
Because it
with you.
made sense in your head at the time, but you
A
say it out
hundred
loud
million
and you're
percent.
like, no.
Listen, a lot of things make sense in my head, and then I look at what I wrote and go, oh wait, that didn't make sense, and I need to rewrite it. I love that. So, I mean, for me, every time I write a book with a client or a book for a client, right? I feel like there's a huge relationship that gets built. How important do you feel the relationship is between ghostwriter, editor, client? Like, how important is that relationship for you guys?
I think it's like number one because otherwise, again, like it becomes a soul crushing experience. If you have a connection with your ghostwriter, with your editor, they're gonna hear where you're coming from. They're gonna hear your voice. They're gonna know how to edit better. They're gonna know how to write better. Um, it's like it's a non-negotiable. If you don't click with your ghostwriter, your editor, maybe a proofreader you could get away with. Like, who cares if cross T's, dot I's, whatever. Sorry, proofreaders, I didn't really mean that. I love
I call
you.
them the grammar crew. Uh-huh,
Yes,
yeah.
and I love them. I love them. Please, that was not an insult, but um, definitely you need to be on good terms. Like you need to sit back, have a coffee, share your life, whatever. Just get in the groove with your ghostwriter and your editor, or it's going to be so bad, so
I love that.
awful.
And then I think
I
the very last component for me, and I'm going to finish it off here, is I think that it's essential that clients really work with, whether they've had a ghostwriter or not. It's important. It's essential that they work with the editor on how to launch and market their book because you've been reading it, you've been editing it. You're kind of that last touch point before it's going to go to publish, which means that I feel like editors, even more so than the ghostwriter themselves, have this really strong insight into how to position it in the market because you see it now that it's been cleaned up and polished and ready to go to print. So what,
well, and
yeah,
that kind of goes back to you saying like you go to bat for the author. I find editors do go to bat for the author, but
totally.
also mostly we're going to bat for the reader. So like how is this going
Mhm.
to be perceived? What are they going to think when they read this paragraph or that? So it's automatically in the marketing category.
Yeah.
You can't help it. If you're going to be a good editor, you need to be thinking of that as well. So if you have an editor, like my company Entourage, will start with editing. And then if they want more, they're like, oh gosh, I don't know how to publish, or I don't know how to get a cover, or I don't know how to launch, or how do I have a launch event, and how do I advertise, how do I become a bestseller, all that kind of stuff. We can help with that too. But it all really starts with that, like going to bat for the reader. What are they
Yeah.
getting? Are you having that in your frame of mind so that marketing is top of mind? And
And
yeah, if you have
this
an
is
editor
why,
that can do all
yeah,
that, great.
100%. And this is why I love working with Jennifer because my job is to go to bat for the reader. I obviously write for the reader, but I go to bat for the writer. Um,
Right.
and Jen is really focused on going to bat for the reader of your work.
Yeah.
So you get both sides of the coin. You get somebody who's in your corner who's going to support the work and creating it, and then you have somebody else who's also supporting the work and creating it, but doing it very much from the perspective of how is this going to work in the marketplace? How do we sell it? How do we
Exactly.
get it out there? So it's a both and. I love that. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank
Always
you.
insightful as always. I love our conversations, and I'm sure I'll have you back on to talk more editing goodness at some other point.
I hope so. That
Um,
would be great.
if you guys have any editing questions or any questions about the book and publishing industry, please drop them below. Next episode coming soon. Until then, until next time, keep writing.
Thank you.
Hold on.